Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. I rise in strong...
Senator, the Senate is in a quorum call.
I would ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise in strong opposition to this legislation, the so-called 21st Century Cures Act. While I appreciate the work that Senator Murray and Senator Alexander and others have done on this legislation, I cannot in good conscience vote for it in its current form. Madam President, it goes without saying that everybody, whether they are Republicans, Democrats, or independents, we all want to find cures to the terrible diseases that are impacting the lives of millions of people, whether it is cancer, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's diabetes, whether it's so many of these terrible illnesses that strike children. We all want to find cures to those illnesses. But that is really not what this debate is about. The debate that we are having on this bill is simple, and that is, do we continue to cave in to the demands of the pharmaceutical industry, an industry that is making record-breaking profits by charging the American people by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? Or do we have the courage to stand up to the CEOs of big drug companies whose prices are so high that 1 out of 5 Americans who get a prescription from a doctor is unable to afford to fill that prescription? And let's be clear, if you cannot afford to fill that prescription, you're likely going to get sicker, and in some cases, you are going to die. So it is incomprehensible to me that we have a major bill dealing with prescription drugs, and yet we're running away from the most important issue, the issue that impacts millions of people, that the American people feel very strongly about, and that is the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, the outrageously high prices that our people are being forced to pay. That is the issue that we must be focusing on. Madam President, if we were really serious about finding cures for life-threatening illnesses and diseases, maybe, just maybe, we would adequately fund the National Institutes of Health and the Food and Drug Administration. But over the last 12 years, medical research has been cut by over 20% after adjusting for inflation. And even if this bill passes, funding for the NIH this year will still be roughly $7 billion less than what it was in 2004. Meanwhile, over the same time period, just to put this in context, the top 1% has received over $1 trillion in tax breaks. In other words, we cannot fund the agencies who are trying to find cures for diseases, but we can give unbelievably significant tax breaks to the 1%. Madam President, let me very briefly give you a few major reasons why this bill should be defeated. Number one, as I said a moment ago, the most important prescription drug-related crisis facing our country right now is the skyrocketing price of prescription drugs. This bill does not even deal with that issue. How can we talk about a bill dealing with the pharmaceutical industry without addressing the elephant in the room, the fact that we pay the highest prices in the world for medicine, and in many cases, those costs are soaring? In America today, 1 out of 5 people between the ages of 19 and 64 cannot afford to fill their prescriptions. Hundreds of thousands of seniors are forced to cut their pills in half because the medicine they need is just too expensive. Let me just give you a few examples, just a few. Since 2007, Mylan has raised the price of a package of EpiPens by 461%, while rewarding its CEO with a 671% increase in compensation. Maybe, just maybe, we might want to address that issue. Last year, Turing Pharmaceuticals increased the price of Daraprim by 5,000% overnight. 5,000%, from $13.50 to $750 for just one pill. And while thousands of children in Flint have been poisoned by lead, Valiant increased the price of the leading drug to treat this disease by 2,700% in a single year, from $7,100 to about $27,000. Meanwhile, at a time when 35 million Americans cannot afford the medicine they need, the drug companies are making enormous profits and providing extremely generous compensation packages to their executives. Last year, fellow Americans, while you are paying more and more for prescription drugs you desperately need, the 5 major drug companies made over $50 billion in profit. $50 billion in profit, 5 drug companies, while the top 10 pharmaceutical executives received over $320 million in compensation. In fact, the prescription drug companies literally have money to burn. This year, the pharmaceutical industry spent $131 million to defeat Proposition 61, a ballot initiative in California that would have lowered average drug prices by at least 24% for millions of people. They spent $131 million in California to defeat a proposal that would have lowered drug prices. Madam President, how does it happen that the pharmaceutical companies can charge any price they want for prescription drugs? The answer is clear. The prescription drug industry, along with Wall Street, are the most powerful political forces in America. I have been fighting the greed of the prescription drug industry for decades, and as far as I can tell, the pharmaceutical industry always wins. They never lose. They win, but the American people lose. Since 1998, pharmaceutical industry has spent more than $3 billion in lobbying all over this place, hundreds and hundreds of lobbyists telling members of Congress what the pharmaceutical industry wants. And they have made hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign contributions. They currently have over 1,200 lobbyists on their payrolls here in Washington, including former leaders of the Democratic and Republican parties. That is why the pharmaceutical industry makes huge profits while the American people cannot afford the medicine they need. Now, Madam President, it would be one thing if these outrageous price increases were happening in other major countries. Are these price increases taking place all over the world? The answer is they are not. In 2013, we spent nearly 40% more per person on prescription drugs than Canada and 5 times as much as in Denmark. Now, how does it happen that in Denmark, in Canada, in the UK, and France, the cost of prescription drugs is significantly lower than it is in the United States? That is an issue that it is high time for us to begin discussing. In the United States, just as an example, it costs $730 for a 90-day supply of Crestor, which is used to treat high cholesterol, but just $160 in Canada. $730 in the United States, $160 in Canada. Americans with heartburn pay $736 for a 90-day supply of Nexium, but that same product costs $214 in Canada. Americans with arthritis are forced to pay $895 for Celebrex, but just $212 in Canada. Now, Madam President, during this campaign, recent campaign, President-elect Donald Trump promised, among many other things, to lower the prices of prescription drugs. That's what Mr. Trump said. He promised that he would, and I quote, allow consumers access to imported, safe, and dependable drugs from overseas to bring more options to consumers. He also promised to require Medicare to negotiate with the drug companies for lower prices, something that today is banned by law. Here is what President-elect Trump said while on the campaign trail, quote, we are not allowed to negotiate drug prices. Can you believe it? We pay about $300 billion more than we are supposed to, than if we negotiated the price. So there's 300 billions on day one we solve. End of quote, Donald Trump. So since President-elect Trump supports requiring Medicare to negotiate with drug companies to lower prices, which is an idea that many, many people in this body also support, and since Mr. Trump believes that we should be able to re-import low-cost medicines from Canada and other countries, I am quite confident that all of my Republican colleagues will support an amendment in my hands that will do exactly what Mr. Trump said that he would accomplish as president. Think about what you can do to pave the way for Mr. Trump coming in. You will have already satisfied one of his major campaign pledges. Therefore, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the pending motion to concur with an amendment be set aside, and I ask unanimous consent for the immediate consideration of a motion to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 34 with a further amendment that I send to the desk.
Madam President,
Senator from Missouri.
reserving the right to object. One way to be sure and not get the work done we're doing today is to add another topic. I think the work we're doing today is important. My friend from Vermont mentioned some statistics that were right a couple of years ago about the decline in healthcare research money. We're not where we should be, but we're not where we were 2 years ago either, when my side took control of the majority. I got a chance to chair the Appropriating Committee for Health and Human Services, and for the first time in 12 years, we had an almost 7% increase. And the gentleman's absolutely right. At that moment, we were 22% behind in research buying dollars where we were 12 years earlier. But if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So we did what the government should do and what people want the government to do. We went through the process of prioritizing. We eliminated 18 programs last year, zeroed them out that were either duplicative, or not doing what they were designed to do, so we could prioritize exactly the important healthcare research that this bill talks about. And my friend from Vermont mentioned a 7% increase last year, another 6.5% increase this year, another $2 billion came out of our committee, came out of the full appropriating committee, has been on the desk ready for the minority to let us take up for months now. That would be almost a 14% increase in 2 years. 14% of the 22% would have been eliminated if we could have taken up the bill that I still wish we were voting on today. But the bill we are voting on today does some of what that baseline increase would do. And why do we want to increase healthcare research? Obviously, for individuals and their families who might be able to better deal with or totally avoid a healthcare crisis they'll otherwise have. From the point of view of taxpayers, Alzheimer's, already mentioned here today, Alzheimer's, we're spending $250 billion a year on Alzheimer's right now. The NIH projection for 2050 is we'd be spending $1.1 trillion that year of today's dollars. That's twice the defense budget. Now, you know, 1.1 trillion sounds like a lot. 250 billion sounds like a lot to me. In fact, pretty small numbers sound like a lot to me. But when I think of twice the defense budget that we could be spending on Alzheimer's alone, and that's just tax dollars, that's not what families would be spending. If we don't invest in research now, it makes a big difference. So from Alzheimer's, there's an inducement here that I'd like to see even more specific, and when we get back to the regular appropriating process, I'll work to do that again. But there's a prize involved here, inducement. There's the Beau Biden Cancer Research Fund. There's money that could go to autism. Everything from Alzheimer's to autism benefits when we focus on healthcare research. There's also money in this bill to further enhance the ability to get drugs to the marketplace quicker so that people have an opportunity that they don't currently have to work with their doctor and decide they want to try that new advancement. But this bill matters. I think in some ways it's better to let NIH, the real researchers, prioritize spending and us prioritize research as a topic. But, Mr. President, I think this bill should pass. I think it should pass today. I was on the House floor last week when they overwhelmingly voted for it to pass. The sure way for this bill not to pass in this Congress is to do something now that changes the subject. Now, I'm particularly glad that my longtime friend from both the House and the Senate is really interested in President Trump fulfilling his campaign pledges. And I'm particularly pleased to see him agree with at least that one pledge, but that will happen next year. Today's work is to pass the bill on 21st century cures. I look forward to the vote that does that before we leave this week. Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, 2
Senator
points.
from Vermont.
First of all, let me reiterate that in inflation adjusted for dollars, not nominal dollars, funding for the National Institute of Health this year will still be roughly $7 billion less than what it received in 2004. That's point number one. Point number two, and I would yield briefly to my friend from Missouri. Do I hear you saying that you, in fact, are supportive of A, reimportation, and B, having the federal government, Medicare, negotiate prescription drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry? That's what I thought I heard you say. I would yield to my friend.
Well, in terms of the money, I thank my friend for yielding. In terms of the money available for research, we have taken that 22% of buying power and changed it to about 15%. If we would have dealt with our bill this year, we would have changed it from 15 to about 7 or 8. And we need to get back to where we were 12 years ago and then not stop in real buying power. I want to do that. And I think what I said about the overall discussion of reimportation and other things was I was just delighted to hear my friend from Vermont so supportive of what the next president's program is. And I
am very supportive of it. He's dead right.
And he will.
But I was wondering if my friend, when he said we are going to get to it next year, what does that mean? Does that mean you will be pushing the ability of Americans and pharmacists and distributors to be able to benefit from unfettered free trade and buy low-cost medicine, same exact drugs as sold in America from Canada and the UK? And will you also, as Mr. Trump made the point, allow Medicare to negotiate for lower prices? Well, that's something we can expect our Republican friends to support the president-elect on.
If my friend would yield, I would just say that we have passed this bill in the Congress, that bill, several times over the last few years. On each occasion, often with Democrat administrations, the only obstacle had been for the administration to certify that reimportation could be safely done.
Exactly right.
And none of them have ever been willing to do that.
My friend is exactly right. Neither Republican or Democratic administration will have the guts to stand up to the pharmaceutical industry. So that today, if you have a salad, it is likely you're going to get your salad, your tomatoes, your lettuce from Mexico or some other country in very poorly inspected farms. That's no problem. But somehow or another, we are led to believe that it is impossible to bring in brand-named medicine from Canada or the United Kingdom or France. Just cannot be done. It is beyond belief that anybody with a straight face believes that that is true. Clearly, this is what the pharmaceutical industry wants us to believe, but I would hope that my friend from Missouri will not accept what the pharmaceutical industry tells us and understands that the next Secretary of HHS should certify with proper procedures that we can re-import medicine. I would yield to my friend.
Well, I would thank my friend for yielding, and I would just say that if the Secretary of HHS can certify that, that's a good thing. And I voted for that in the past. But I know what a tomato looks like. Farm boy that I am, I know what a tomato looks like. I don't know what's inside a capsule. And that's always been the obstacle that the people we have asked to look at this and certify the safety. Now, if people can figure out how to do that so you know what's inside that pill, the worst thing you can do health-wise is believe you're taking a pill that isn't the pill you believe you're taking.
Yeah, I know what a tomato looks like too, but you don't know what kind of pesticides or how that tomato was grown. The idea that we cannot get a product from Pfizer or the other major drug companies across the border from Canada safely really doesn't pass the laugh test, frankly. This is one of the things the pharmaceutical industry has been pushing for years. So we have unfettered free trade for fish, for vegetables, for meat from all over the world. But from Canada or the UK or France, somehow we cannot safely bring medicine into this country at a fraction of the price that our pharmacists are now paying. Frankly, I would say to the senator from Missouri, does not really pass the lab test. And I would hope that we can work there. Clearly, we want the medicine coming in to be safe. There's no debate about that. But I think we can do that. And I would look forward to working with you. I would yield.
If I could just say, I think the one thing we will accomplish before this week is out is passing this bill. But I hope this bill doesn't become something that we continue to refer back and say we've already done that. This bill is a step in the right direction, but in healthcare research, it does not get us where I'd like to be or where we were 12 years ago. We need the kind of research dollars that encourage young researchers to stay in the research business, the kind of research dollars that encourage us to find solutions, the kind of research dollars that ensure that every family that could avoid a crisis or be able to deal with it in a better way is able to do that. And so I look forward to the bill without this being passed as we finish the week. And
Well, I agree with the last statement that the senator from Missouri made. But let me give you, Mr. President, another reason why I am opposed to this bill. Incredibly, this legislation makes it easier for prescription drug companies to get away with fraud. And fraud is something that the major drug companies have been perpetuating on the American people for a number of years. It is not widely known, but it should be known, that since 1991, drug companies have paid over $35 billion in fines or reached settlements for fraud and misconduct. $35 billion. But instead of cracking down on pharmaceutical company fraud, this bill actually legalizes the fraudulent behavior of some of the big drug companies. Specifically, under this bill, pharmaceutical companies would be allowed to promote unapproved uses of drugs to insurance companies, a practice which is currently illegal. Mr. President, why would we allow the pharmaceutical industry the opportunity to market drugs to insurance companies for uses that haven't been approved by the FDA? This is a major, major problem. Let me give you a few examples. In 2013, the Justice Department ordered Johnson & Johnson, one of the major pharmaceutical companies in the country, to pay $2.2 billion in fines for, quote, recklessly promoting drugs for uses that have not been proven to be safe and effective, end of quote. According to the U.S. attorney handling the case, Johnson & Johnson's, quote, promotion of Risperdal, I hope I'm pronouncing it correct, Risperdal for unapproved uses threatened the most vulnerable populations of our society, children, the elderly, and those with developmental disabilities, end of quote. Congress rightfully determined that this is unacceptable and made it illegal. But under this bill, it could become legal. That is wrong. In 2010, AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals paid $520 million to resolve allegations that it illegally marketed the antipsychotic drug Seroquel for uses not approved as safe and effective by the FDA. In 2009, Eli Lilly was fined over $1.4 billion for its off-label promotion of another antipsychotic drug known as Cybrexa. According to federal investigators, Eli Lilly's illegal activity increased patients' costs, threatened their safety, and negatively affected the delivery of health care services to over 9 million military members, retirees, and their families who rely on TRICARE, end of quote. Mr. President, we need to make it harder for the pharmaceutical industry to commit fraud. But instead, this bill allows the pharmaceutical industry to, in fact, commit even more fraud. That is unacceptable. Third, Mr. President, let's be clear, this bill would cut Medicare and Medicaid by $1 billion. Mr. President, millions of senior citizens are in desperate need of Medicare and Medicaid. Today, thanks to Medicare, 48 million seniors and 9 million people with disabilities have health insurance coverage through Medicare, and over 73 million Americans are enrolled in Medicaid. The last thing we should be doing today is cutting Medicare and Medicaid. We need to make health care more affordable to senior citizens, the disabled, and low-income families with children, not more expensive. Finally, this bill, and this is quite significant, cuts $3.5 billion from the Affordable Care Act's Prevention Fund to prevent Alzheimer's, diabetes, suicide, heart disease, and lead poisoning. Instead of cutting Medicare and Medicaid, instead of cutting funds for health care programs, we should be demanding that the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. We should not be cutting life and death programs for the most vulnerable people in this country. So I say to my colleagues, if you want to lower the outrageous cost of prescription drugs, vote against this bill. If you're opposed to legalizing pharmaceutical fraud that can endanger the lives of many Americans, please vote against this bill. If you are opposed to cutting Medicare and Medicaid, vote against this bill. If you want to prevent cuts to programs that would prevent Alzheimer's disease and many, many other diseases, vote against this bill. It is time to stand up to the pharmaceutical industry and stand with the American people who are tired of being ripped off by this extremely greedy industry. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I yield the floor.